Everyone mocked her when she inherited nothing but a rusty shipping container. Her siblings took the houses, the cars, the bank accounts, leaving her with what they called worthless junk. But when she pried open the hidden floor beneath years of rust and debris, what she found inside changed everything. Subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The Florida heat pressed down like a weight the morning Claire Bennett stood outside the lawyer's office, her palms damp against the strap of her worn purse. The building's air conditioning had broken 2 days earlier, and the waiting room smelled of sweat, old carpet. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. And the faint bitterness of cheap coffee left too long on the burner. Around her sat her family, her older brother Marcus in his pressed suit, checking his phone every 30 seconds. Her sister Diane, perfectly manicured nails tapping against her designer handbag, and her younger brother Kevin, slouched in his chair with the smirk of someone who already knew he'd won something. Claire had barely slept. Their father, Robert Bennett, had died 3 weeks ago after a brief illness that took everyone by surprise. He'd been a quiet man, a welder by trade, who'd spent 40 years working the shipyards before retiring to a small house on the outskirts of Tampa. He'd never been wealthy, never flashy, but he'd been steady, the kind of man who showed love through fixing things, through making sure the bills were paid, through being there. She was the only one who'd visited him regularly in those final years. Marcus was too busy with his real estate empire. Diane had moved to Atlanta and rarely called. Kevin drifted between jobs and girlfriends, always asking for money. But Claire, working double shifts as a nurse's aide and raising her 8-year-old daughter Emma alone after her divorce, still found time every Sunday to sit with her father on his porch, listening to his stories about the old days at the shipyard. Attorney Morrison finally called them in, a tired man in his 60s, whose grey suit matched his demeanor. They filed into his office, the cramped space, forcing them to sit close together, despite the emotional distance between them. Morrison cleared his throat and opened the file, his reading glasses perched on his nose. "To my son Marcus," he began. "I leave my house at 1247 Oleander Drive and the contents therein, as well as my savings account at First National Bank." Marcus nodded, satisfied. The house was worth at least $300,000 in the current market. "To my daughter Diane, I leave my 2019 Ford F-150 truck and my investment portfolio, currently valued at approximately $150,000. Diane smiled, a small, tight expression of vindication. "To my son Kevin, I leave my workshop tools, my fishing boat, and $20,000 from my checking account to help you find your footing." Kevin straightened, the smirk widening. Then Morrison paused, glancing at Claire with something that might have been sympathy. "And to my daughter Claire Bennett, I leave the property located at 1887 Old Harbor Road, a shipping container, and the land it sits on, approximately 1 acre. The room went silent for exactly 3 seconds before the laughter started. "A shipping container?" Kevin snorted. "That rusted piece of junk out by the abandoned docks? Dad kept his old welding scraps in there," Marcus said, shaking his head. "Claire, I'm sorry. I don't know what he was thinking." Diane's laugh was sharper, more cruel. "You drove 2 hours for this? Honey, you can't even sell that land. It's a brownfield site. The EPA has it flagged for contamination. You literally inherited garbage." Claire felt her face burn. She stared at the paper. Morrison slid across the desk, seeing the words but not comprehending them. "Property deed. Land parcel 447B. 1 shipping container structure, as is. There must be some mistake," she whispered. Morrison shook his head gently. "Your father was very specific. He updated this will 6 months ago. Everything is in order." As they left the office, her siblings were already on their phones, Marcus calling his realtor, Diane texting her financial advisor, Kevin making plans to sell the boat. No one looked at Claire. No one asked if she was okay. She sat in her 15-year-old Honda in the parking lot, gripping the steering wheel, tears blurring her vision. The air conditioning barely worked, and the heat made it hard to breathe. She looked at the deed again, the address unfamiliar. Old Harbor Road. She'd never even heard her father mention it. That night, after putting Emma to bed, she sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, searching for the address. Google Maps showed a remote stretch of industrial wasteland near the waterfront, miles from anything. The satellite view revealed a rusted rectangle, sitting alone in a field of dirt and scrub brush, surrounded by chain-link fence. She zoomed in, studying it. The container looked abandoned, forgotten, like something washed ashore and left to rot. Why would her father leave her this? It didn't make sense. He'd always been thoughtful, always fair. Had he been angry with her? Had she disappointed him somehow? The next morning, she called in sick to work something she never did, and drove out to Old Harbor Road with Emma. The girl sat in the back seat, reading a library book, oblivious to her mother's turmoil. The road deteriorated from asphalt to gravel to dirt, winding through areas where old warehouses stood empty, their windows broken, graffiti covering their walls. Finally, she found it. A rusted gate held shut with a chain and an old padlock. The number 1887 was barely visible on a weathered sign. She got out, the heat immediately oppressive, and walked to the gate. Through the fence, she could see it, a 40-foot shipping container, its surface streaked with rust, sitting in the middle of an overgrown lot. Weeds grew, waist-high around it. The corners were dented, and one end looked like it had been damaged in a collision years ago. "Mom, why are we here?" Emma asked from the car window. "I'm not sure yet, baby," Claire said quietly. She tried the padlock with the key Morrison had given her. It stuck at first, corroded by salt air, but finally clicked open. The gate screeched on its hinges as she pushed it wide. The walk to the container felt like a mile, though it was barely 50 yards. Up close, it looked worse, the metal pitted and flaking. The paint long since surrendered to the elements. A heavy lock secured the double doors at one end. She tried another key from the ring Morrison had given her, and after some struggle, it turned. The doors groaned open, releasing a wave of hot, stale air that smelled of rust, motor oil, and decades of neglect. Claire covered her nose and mouth, squinting into the darkness. As her eyes adjusted, her heart sank further. The interior was filled with junk. Old, welding equipment, bent metal rods, stacks of rusted tools, broken machinery parts, cracked plastic containers, rotting cardboard boxes, and piles of what looked like scrap metal. Everything was coated in dust and grime. In one corner, a tarp covered something large, and near the back, water stains marked where the roof had leaked. She stood in the doorway, overwhelmed by disappointment and confusion. This was it. This was what her father had left her while everyone else got houses and money and new trucks. A container full of trash. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Realtor says, Dad's house will close fast. You want me to help you find a scrapyard for that container. Might get $500 if you're lucky." Then Diane. "Can't believe he left you that mess. Maybe he forgot to update that part of the will?" The messages kept coming throughout the day, a constant reminder of their pity and contempt. By evening, Claire sat on her couch, Emma asleep beside her, scrolling through a text thread with her younger cousin Jessica. "They're all laughing at the family dinner tonight. Marcus did an impression of you trying to sell a rusty box. I'm sorry, Claire. That's so messed up." She set the phone down and closed her eyes. The exhaustion wasn't just physical. It was the weight of being dismissed, diminished, forgotten. Again. Her whole life had been a series of being overlooked. The daughter who wasn't ambitious enough. The wife who wasn't exciting enough. The mother who was barely keeping her head above water. But her father had never made her feel that way. He'd been proud of her nursing work. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Proud of how she'd raised Emma alone. Proud of her resilience. So why this? Why leave her something that felt like punishment? She remembered something he'd said once, about 6 months before he died. They'd been sitting on his porch, watching the sunset, and he'd looked at her with that gentle expression he always wore and said, "Claire Bear, you know what I've learned in this life? The things that matter most, they don't shine. They don't make noise. They just keep working, quiet and steady, even when nobody's watching. Like you." At the time, she'd thought he was just being kind. Now, the memory felt like a clue she didn't know how to read. The weekend came, and with it, more mockery. At a family barbecue, she'd been guilted into attending at Marcus's new house, bought with an inheritance that should have been split fairly. Her siblings and their spouses made jokes about her prime real estate. "Maybe you can rent it out as luxury storage," Diane's husband laughed. "Charge hipsters to keep their vintage motorcycles in authentic rust. Or turn it into one of those tiny homes," Kevin suggested, grinning. "You and Emma could live like minimalists." Very trendy. Claire excused herself to the bathroom and stood there for 10 minutes, staring at her reflection, trying to hold back tears. She was 42 years old, working a job that barely covered rent and groceries, raising a daughter alone, and her family treated her like a punchline. When she returned outside, she overheard Marcus talking to their uncle. "I feel bad for her, but Dad must have had his reasons. Maybe he knew she couldn't handle real money. At least with the container, she can't screw anything up." That was the moment something shifted inside her. Not anger exactly, but determination. She would go back to that container, and she would search it properly. Not because she expected to find anything valuable, but because she refused to accept that her father, the man who'd taught her to be thorough, to finish what she started, to never give up, had left her garbage without reason. Monday morning, she took a personal day, dropped Emma at school, and drove back to Old Harbor Road with work gloves, a flashlight, trash bags, and a crowbar she'd borrowed from a neighbor. The container sat waiting, its doors hanging open from her previous visit. She took a breath and stepped inside. The heat was already building, turning the metal box into an oven. She started at the front, methodically sorting through the chaos. Most of it was indeed trash, broken tools, empty paint cans, warped wood, plastic sheeting that crumbled at her touch. Hours passed. Sweat soaked through her shirt. Her arms ached from lifting and hauling. She filled bag after bag with genuine junk, dragging them outside to sort later. The container slowly emptied, revealing its corroded floor and water-stained walls. By noon, she'd cleared about half of it. Nothing but scrap. She sat on the floor, drinking water from a bottle that was already warm, wondering if she was wasting her time. Maybe her siblings were right. Maybe this was all there was. But she kept going. By mid-afternoon, she'd reached the back wall, where the heavy tarp covered the large shape she'd noticed before. She grabbed a corner and pulled. The fabric was heavier than expected, stiff with age and grime. As it fell away, she saw what it had been protecting. An old steel workbench, bolted to the container floor, its surface scarred and dented from years of use. She ran her hands over it, recognizing it immediately. This had been her father's bench from his home workshop, the one he'd worked at for decades. She could picture him there, bent over some project, the smell of metal and WD-40, the sound of his radio playing classic rock. Why had he moved it here? She looked underneath, shining her flashlight into the shadows. Something caught her eye. The floor beneath the bench looked different. While the rest of the container's floor was a single, corrugated sheet of metal, this section had visible seams, as if it had been cut and replaced. Her heart began to beat faster. She tried to move the workbench, but it wouldn't budge. The bolts were rusted solid. She used the crowbar to pry at the edges of the floor panel, and after several minutes of work, one corner lifted with a shriek of protesting metal. Beneath it was darkness, and the smell of dry, cool air, completely different from the suffocating heat of the container. She pulled harder, the adrenaline overriding her exhaustion, until the entire panel came free, revealing a rectangular opening about 4 feet by 6 feet. A ladder descended into darkness. Claire's hands trembled as she aimed her flashlight down into the hole. The beam revealed concrete walls, a small underground space perhaps 8 feet deep, and at the bottom she saw them. Metal boxes, lots of them, stacked neatly against the walls. She tested the ladder. The rungs were solid, made of rebar, welded to the sides. Carefully, moving slowly, she descended. The temperature dropped immediately. The underground space was 20 degrees cooler, insulated from the Florida heat. At the bottom, she stood in what was essentially a concrete vault, roughly 10 feet square. The ceiling was reinforced with steel beams, and the walls were lined with heavy-duty shelving. On those shelves sat dozens of metal lockboxes, the kind used for important documents, each one sealed with a padlock. She tried the keys from her father's ring on the first box. The third key fit. The lock clicked open, and she lifted the lid with shaking hands. Inside, wrapped in plastic, were stacks of bills. Cash, $100 bills, bound with rubber bands, filling the box completely. Claire's legs went weak. She sat down hard on the concrete floor, staring at the money. She opened another box. More cash. And another. More. There had to be 20 boxes in here. Maybe more. She couldn't process the numbers, couldn't think clearly. Her father had been a welder, a blue-collar worker. Where had this come from? In one of the boxes, beneath the cash, she found a letter. Her hands trembled so badly she could barely unfold it. Dear Claire Bennett, if you're reading this, it means you found what I left for you. I knew you would. Your brother and sister, they'd have given up after 5 minutes. Or hired someone else to clean out the container without ever looking themselves. But you've always been the one who finishes what she starts. This money, and there's close to $3 million down there. Sweetheart, it came from a settlement I received 30 years ago. A workplace accident at the shipyard that I never told anyone about, because I didn't want the family fighting over it. Didn't want the lawyers taking half. Didn't want the government taking their share. I took my lump sum in cash, and I've been keeping it safe ever since, adding to it when I could, waiting for the right time. I gave your siblings what they expected, what they thought they deserved. The house, the truck, the accounts, those are worth something, sure, but they're not what matters. They'll spend it all in 5 years, maybe less, and never think twice. But you, Claire, you've spent your whole life taking care of others. Your daughter, your patients, me. In my last years, you've never asked for anything, never demanded your share. You just kept working, kept loving, kept showing up. You're the strongest person I know, and you don't even see it. This money is yours. Use it to build the life you deserve. Go back to school if you want. Buy a real house. Give Emma everything. Or don't. Just knowing you have it, that you'll never have to struggle the way you have been, that's enough for me. I love you, Claire Bennett. I always have. You were always my favorite, though I tried not to show it. You're the one who inherited what actually matters, not what I owned, but who I was. The person who keeps working even when nobody's watching. The person who doesn't quit. Your container isn't garbage. It's freedom, and you earned every bit of it. Love, Dad. Claire sat in the underground vault, the letter clutched to her chest, and cried, deep, wrenching sobs that echoed off the concrete walls. She cried for the years of struggling, for the nights she'd lain awake wondering how to pay for Emma's school supplies, for every time her family had made her feel small and worthless. She cried for her father, who'd loved her enough to see her clearly and to protect her in a way she'd never known she needed. But they were also tears of relief, of vindication, of the sudden, overwhelming realization that everything had just changed. She climbed back up into the container, her legs still shaky, and sat in the doorway, looking out at the overgrown lot, the rusted fence, the empty industrial landscape, this worthless piece of land, this garbage container. Everyone had mocked it held more than her siblings' combined inheritance. Much, much more. And unlike theirs, hers came with something they would never have, the understanding that she'd been seen, valued, and chosen. The next weeks blurred together in a strange combination of secrecy and surreal planning. Claire told no one about her discovery. Not Emma, not her friends, certainly not her family. She called in sick to work for 3 days, something that raised eyebrows but couldn't be helped, and spent that time carefully transporting the cash in small batches to a safety deposit box she rented at a bank across town, far from where any of her family did business. She worked methodically, the way her father had taught her to approach any big project, one step at a time. No shortcuts, no panic. She counted every dollar, documenting amounts with photographs for her records. The final total was staggering: $2.8 million in cash, accumulated over 30 years, carefully preserved in that underground vault her father must have built himself, probably working alone late at night, telling no one. She researched constantly, learning about estate law, gift taxes, ways to legitimize and protect sudden wealth. She consulted with an attorney 3 counties away, a young woman who specialized in helping people navigate complex financial situations without judgment. Together, they created a plan to slowly, carefully integrate the money into Claire's life in ways that wouldn't trigger IRS scrutiny or family suspicion. The attorney, whose name was Michelle, looked at Claire with something like awe. Your father was incredibly smart about this. Cash settlements aren't reported the same way. If he kept it for 30 years without spending it, there's no paper trail. Legally, once probate closes on his official estate, this is yours, free and clear. It was never part of his reportable assets. So, I don't have to tell my family. It's your inheritance, Claire. What you choose to share is entirely up to you. Meanwhile, life continued in its old patterns. Claire returned to work, smiled through her shifts, went to Emma's school events, and attended one more family dinner where Marcus announced he was selling their father's house for $340,000 and feeling blessed by Dad's generosity. You ever figure out what to do with your container? Kevin asked through a mouthful of potato salad. Still working on it, Claire said quietly. Diane laughed. Just call a demo company, honey. Have them haul it away. Move on. No one expects you to make something of that situation. Claire nodded, letting them think she'd accepted her fate as the forgotten daughter, the pitied sister, the one who got nothing while they got everything. She let them believe it, because she was beginning to understand what her father had known. Their judgment meant nothing. Their laughter was born from their own emptiness, their own inability to see past the surface of things. 3 months after finding the vault, Claire made her first major move. She paid off her debts, credit cards she'd been carrying since the divorce, medical bills from Emma's broken arm 2 years ago, the balance on her dying Honda. Gone. In one day, her monthly expenses dropped by $600. Then she started the process of quietly buying a house. Not a mansion that would raise questions, but a solid 3-bedroom home in a good school district. Purchased through an LLC. Michelle helped her set up, paid for in cash, structured to look like a legitimate business purchase that she was renting to herself. It took 2 months to close, but when it was done, she owned it free and clear. She told Emma they were moving because of a work opportunity, and the girl was so excited about having her own room that she didn't question it. The day they moved in, Claire stood in the empty living room, sunlight streaming through clean windows, hardwood floors gleaming, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years: security. She still worked her nursing aide job, but she cut back to 3 days a week, telling her supervisor she needed more time with Emma. This was true, but it was also strategic. Maintaining some employment kept her life looking normal, while she quietly restructured everything behind the scenes. She enrolled Emma in piano lessons, bought her new clothes that actually fit, signed her up for a summer camp she'd always wanted to attend, but they'd never been able to afford. She did these things gradually, carefully, always with explanations that sounded plausible. "I got a small settlement from Dad's estate," or "I'm budgeting better," or "We're doing okay now." Emma bloomed. The anxiety Claire had seen in her daughter, the worry about money, the careful way she asked for things began to fade. The girl smiled more, laughed louder, stopped apologizing for needing new shoes. And through it all, Claire kept her secret, guarding it the way her father had, understanding now why he'd chosen to hide his wealth rather than display it. Money changed people, not the person who had it, but everyone around them. She'd seen it at Marcus's barbecues, the way Diane's friends treated her differently now that she was driving a luxury SUV, the way Kevin suddenly had cousins he'd never talked to calling him for loans. Claire wanted none of that. She wanted peace. She wanted to raise her daughter without the burden of others' expectations or jealousy. She wanted to honor her father's gift by living the life he'd wanted for her, free, secure, and unbothered by those who'd never valued her anyway. At Thanksgiving, 6 months after her father's death, the family gathered at Diane's new house in Atlanta. Claire drove up with Emma, staying at a modest hotel rather than imposing on anyone. She arrived at dinner in jeans and a simple sweater, carrying a pie she'd made herself, looking exactly as she always had. The house was impressive. Diane had used her inheritance to buy a mini mansion in a gated community. She gave tours, showing off the home theater, the wine cellar, the master bathroom with its rainfall shower experience. Marcus had recently purchased a vacation condo in Miami. Kevin had blown through most of his $20,000 on a boat he never used and a series of bad investments. They asked about Claire, the perfunctory way people ask when they don't really care about the answer. "Oh, we're fine," Claire said, smiling. "Emma's doing great in school. I cut back my hours at work to spend more time with her." "How are you managing?" Diane asked, her concern transparently fake. "With less income and all?" "We're okay. Dad's life insurance helped." This was true. He'd had a small policy that had paid out $5,000, split among all the children. It was cover for the small improvements they'd noticed. "And the container?" Marcus asked. "You ever sell that thing?" "Actually, no. I've been using it for storage." This got a laugh. "Storage of what? You don't have anything worth storing." Claire just smiled, cutting her turkey, saying nothing. Across the table, Emma caught her eye and grinned, in on the private joke even if she didn't know the details. They had a secret, mother and daughter, a life that was better than anyone here could imagine. And the beauty of it was that no one would ever know unless Claire wanted them to. After dinner, while the others were drinking wine and watching football, Claire stepped outside onto Diane's back patio. The night was cool, stars visible despite the city lights. She thought of her father, wished she could tell him what his gift had meant, how it had changed everything. She pulled out her phone and texted Michelle, her attorney, ready for phase 2. They'd been planning it for months. Claire was going back to school, nursing school this time, to get her RN license. She was starting a small foundation in her father's name to help other single parents in crisis. She was investing carefully, building a future not just for Emma, but for Emma's children, for generations that would never have to struggle the way she had. But tonight, standing on her sister's patio, listening to the muffled sound of her siblings' laughter inside, she felt something simpler than vindication. Gratitude. Her father had given her more than money. He'd given her proof that she'd been seen, valued, and trusted. He'd given her the certainty that she'd been his favorite, not because she'd demanded it, but because she'd earned it, through years of quiet, steadfast love. The container was still there, out on Old Harbor Road. Still locked, still looking like abandoned junk to anyone who passed by. She'd keep it that way. Let it be a monument to everything they'd missed, to every time they'd laughed at her, to every moment they'd thought she was worth less than them. They would never know the truth. And that was exactly how it should be. Inside, someone called her name. Claire took one last look at the stars, made a silent promise to her father's memory, and went back to join her family, carrying her secret like a pearl in her pocket, precious and perfectly hidden. 1 year after her father's death, Claire sat in her home office, a converted bedroom with a desk, good lighting, and walls painted the soft blue. Emma had chosen reviewing her financial portfolio on the screen. The numbers still felt surreal. Sometimes. The money had been carefully invested, diversified according to Michelle's guidance, growing steadily while providing enough passive income that Claire had quit her nursing aide job entirely. She was now 3 months into her RN program, taking classes 4 days a week, studying in the evenings while Emma did homework at the kitchen table. Their lives had transformed, in ways both visible and invisible. The visible changes were modest. The nice house, the reliable car Claire had purchased to replace the Honda, Emma's braces and piano lessons, and the college fund that now held $200,000. But the invisible changes were deeper. Claire slept through the night now, no longer waking at 3 a.m. in panic about bills. She was healthier, having time and resources for regular doctor visits and decent food. She smiled more. So did Emma. And still, no one knew. Her family assumed she was managing better, perhaps helped by her mysterious settlement, or simply by being more frugal. They'd stopped asking questions, lost interest in her story, gone back to their own lives and their own gradually dwindling inheritances. Marcus's house needed a new roof, $30,000 he hadn't budgeted for. Diane's husband had lost his job, and they were burning through savings. Kevin had sold the boat at a loss and was back to asking relatives for loans. The money their father had left them was evaporating the way money always does when it isn't respected, when it's seen as a windfall rather than a responsibility. Claire had learned something her siblings never would. Wealth wasn't about having money. It was about having enough. About security rather than luxury. About building something that lasted rather than something that impressed. She'd also learned something else. Something that had surprised her. She didn't hate her siblings for how they'd treated her. She pitied them. They'd received exactly what they'd asked for. Immediate, visible, spendable wealth. And they'd failed to see the difference between inheritance and legacy. Her father had tried to teach them in the only way he could, and they'd missed the lesson entirely. That evening, Claire got a call from Marcus. His voice had the slightly sheepish tone of someone asking for something they knew they didn't deserve. "Hey Claire, listen, I've been thinking. You know how Dad left you that container? Have you ever actually had it appraised? The land, I mean. I've been looking at some industrial real estate development happening out near those docks, and I'm thinking that property might actually be worth something now." Claire felt a smile tugging at her lips. "Is that right?" "Yeah. There's a company buying up parcels for a new shipping complex. Might be worth, I don't know, 50 or 60,000. Maybe more. I could help you negotiate the sale if you want. For a small fee. Family discount." She let the silence stretch for a moment, imagining his face as he waited for her grateful acceptance. "I appreciate the outing offer, Marcus, but I think I'm going to hold on to it." "Hold on to it. Claire, be smart. It's a rusted shipping container on contaminated land. Take the money while you can get it. I'm comfortable with my decision." There was a pause. Then, "You know, I've been meaning to say, Diane and I were talking, and we feel like maybe Dad's will wasn't entirely fair. You got something, sure, but it's not equivalent to what we received. If you wanted to contest it, we'd understand. We could maybe work out a more equitable distribution." And there it was. They'd burned through their inheritance faster than expected, and now they were circling back, looking for more. The will was perfectly fair, Claire said, her voice steady. Dad gave each of us exactly what he thought we could handle. I'm happy with what I received. But I need to go, Marcus. Emma and I are making dinner. She hung up before he could respond, her hands steady, her conscience clear. She thought of texting Michelle about the call, but decided against it. It didn't matter. They could wonder, investigate, hire lawyers if they wanted. They'd find nothing except a deed to a worthless lot and a container full of, now, actually empty space. The money had never been part of the probate estate. It had never legally existed as far as the government was concerned. It was hers, free and clear, and it would stay that way. That weekend, she took Emma out to Old Harbor Road. The girl had never seen the container, and Claire thought it was time. They pulled through the rusted gate. Claire had replaced the chain with a new lock, maintaining the appearance of abandonment while keeping it secure. "This is what Grandpa left you?" Emma asked, staring at the corroded container. "Yep, it's kind of ugly. Very ugly. But you kept it." "I did." They walked around it together, Emma running her hands over the rust-streaked surface, peering through the open doors at the now empty interior. Claire had cleaned it out, completely, even removed the workbench and sealed the underground vault with fresh concrete. If anyone ever did investigate, they'd find nothing but an empty metal box. "Why did he give you this instead of a house like Uncle Marcus got?" Emma asked. Claire knelt down to her daughter's level, choosing her words carefully. "Because Grandpa knew something important about me. He knew I was the kind of person who would actually look inside, who would take the time to understand what I'd been given, instead of just judging it by how it looked on the outside." "Did you find something?" "I found exactly what he wanted me to find." "What was it?" Claire smiled. "A reminder that the things that matter most don't always shine. Sometimes they're hidden where only patient people can find them." Emma thought about this for a moment, then nodded in that serious way children do when they're trying to understand adult wisdom. "Like treasure." Exactly like treasure. They stood together in the Florida sun, looking at the ugly container that had changed everything, and Claire felt a wave of gratitude so powerful it nearly knocked her over. Not for the money, though, that mattered, but for being seen. For having a father who'd understood her better than she'd understood herself, who'd trusted her with his secret, who'd known she was strong enough to carry it. "Can we go inside?" Emma asked. They climbed into the container, their footsteps echoing off the metal walls. Claire showed her daughter where the workbench had been, described the piles of junk, told her about the hours spent cleaning and sorting, about almost giving up. "But you didn't give up," Emma said. "No, baby, I didn't. Because Grandpa knew you wouldn't." "That's right." They sat together in the doorway, legs dangling, watching the grass move in the breeze. In the distance, Claire could see the water tower that marked the old shipyard, where her father had worked for 4 decades. The world was changing around them, new developments, new money, new people moving in. But this little piece of land would stay the same. She'd never sell it, never develop it. It would remain what it had always been, a testament to the difference between value and worth. "Mom?" Emma's voice was quiet. "Are we rich?" Claire had known this question would come eventually. She chose her answer carefully. "We're comfortable, sweetheart. We have enough. And that's better than being rich." "Is it because of this place?" "Partly. But mostly it's because we're smart about what we have. And we don't waste it trying to impress people who don't matter. Like Aunt Diane and Uncle Marcus." Claire looked at her daughter, saw the intelligence in her eyes, the way she was already learning to read between the lines. "I love your aunt and uncle," she said, which was true in the complicated way. Family love was true, but they have different values than we do, and that's okay. They drove home as the sun was setting, the sky turning orange and purple over the industrial landscape. Emma fell asleep in the passenger seat, her head resting against the window, and Claire drove in comfortable silence, the radio playing softly. When they pulled into their driveway, their house, their home, owned free and clear, Claire sat for a moment before waking Emma. She thought about her father's letter, the one she'd memorized, the one that had changed how she saw herself. "You're the strongest person I know, and you don't even see it." She saw it now, not because of the money, but because of what she'd done with it. She'd been careful, strategic, patient. She'd protected her daughter, built a future, and never once flaunted or squandered what she'd been given. She'd honored her father's trust by becoming the person he'd always believed she was. The next morning, Claire received a group text from Diane. "Family dinner next month at my place. Black tie optional. Celebrating David's new job." Below it, several responses, from cousins and siblings, all congratulatory, all commenting on how blessed Diane and David were, how things were finally turning around for them. Then, Marcus, "Great news. Things are looking up for everyone. Claire, you should come. Bring Emma." She typed and deleted several responses before settling on, "Congratulations, Diane. Emma and I will try to make it." She wouldn't go. She knew that already. The time for those performances was over. She'd been dancing on their stage for years, playing the role of the struggling sister, the one who needed pity and occasional charity, the one who made them feel better about their own lives by comparison. But she wasn't that person anymore. Maybe she never had been. Instead, that weekend, she and Emma went shopping. Really shopping. Not the anxious bargain hunting Claire had done for years, always calculating costs, always putting things back. They bought new clothes for Emma's growing wardrobe, books, art supplies, and a telescope Emma had been wanting. They went to a nice restaurant where Emma ordered pasta and dessert, without Claire flinching at the prices. In the middle of dinner, Emma looked at her mother with sudden seriousness and said, "You're different now." "Different how?" "Happy. You used to worry all the time. You don't worry anymore." Claire felt tears prick her eyes. She'd thought she'd hidden it better, her years of financial anxiety, but children see everything. "You're right," she said. "I don't worry the way I used to. Grandpa gave us a gift, and it wasn't just the container. It was the freedom to stop being afraid." Emma nodded, understanding in the way children sometimes do, even when they don't know all the details. That night, after Emma was asleep, Claire sat at her desk and did something she'd been thinking about for months. She drafted a letter, a long one, addressed to her father, even though he'd never read it. She wrote about finding the vault, about the shock and gratitude, about the year that followed. She wrote about Emma's piano recital, about her nursing classes, about the simple joy of grocery shopping without anxiety. But mostly she wrote about understanding, about how his gift had taught her that love wasn't always expressed in words or presents, but sometimes in preparation. In thinking ahead, in knowing someone well enough to give them exactly what they needed, even if they didn't know they needed it yet. She printed the letter, folded it carefully, and drove out to the cemetery where her father was buried. It was nearly midnight. The gates closed, but she parked outside and walked in anyway, her phone flashlight guiding her path between the headstones. At his grave, she knelt and pressed the letter into the soil at the base of his marker, using a rock to hold it in place. The words would wash away with the next rain, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the saying of them, the acknowledgement of the debt she could never repay but would spend her life honoring. "Thank you," she whispered to the quiet night, "for seeing me, for trusting me, for knowing." The cemetery was silent, except for the distant sound of traffic and the whisper of wind through the oak trees. Claire stayed there for a long time, feeling her father's presence not in any supernatural sense, but in the solid reality of what he'd built for her. A foundation, a future, freedom. When she finally stood and walked back to her car, she felt lighter. The secret she carried was no longer a burden, but a privilege. Let her siblings have their big houses and their fancy dinners, and their social media posts about their blessed lives. She had something they would never have. The certainty that she'd been chosen, trusted, and loved, in a way that didn't need announcement or recognition. She had been her father's favorite, and the proof of it grew quietly in investment accounts, in her daughter's college fund, in the peaceful sleep she now enjoyed every night. The container on Old Harbor Road still stood, rusted and forgotten by everyone except Claire. And that was exactly how it should be, an inheritance that looked like nothing, that everyone had laughed at, that held a secret so perfect it would never need to be revealed. 2 years after her father's death, on the anniversary of the day she'd found the hidden vault, Claire drove out to Old Harbor Road one last time. She'd decided to sell the property not to Marcus or Diane, or anyone in her family, but to a quiet buyer Michelle had found through her network, a small logistics company that needed storage space and didn't ask questions. The sale would net $80,000, a nice addition to her portfolio, but meaningless compared to what the land had already given her. She stood in front of the container one final time, running her hand over the rust-pitted surface, remembering the day she'd opened it, expecting nothing and finding everything. The new owners planned to repurpose it for legitimate storage. Never, knowing what it had once held. "Goodbye," she whispered, though whether to the container or to that chapter of her life, she wasn't sure. As she drove away, the container disappearing in her rearview mirror, Claire thought about the question Emma had asked months ago. Are we rich? The answer, she realized, wasn't about the money in the bank or the house they owned or the future that was now secure. The answer was simpler and more profound. They were rich in the ways that mattered, in peace, in security, in the knowledge that they were loved and valued not for what they had, but for who they were. Her father's inheritance hadn't been the cash in those metal boxes. It had been the lesson hidden beneath them, that the people who matter see beyond the surface, that real love prepares for the future, that the things worth having are often disguised as nothing at all. Claire smiled, thinking of her father's hands building that vault, moving those boxes, writing that letter, all of it done, in secret, in silence, in patient preparation for a moment he wouldn't live to see, but trusted would come. She'd been right to keep the secret, right to let them laugh, right to honor her father's gift by living the life he'd wanted for her, quiet, secure, and free. The rusty container was gone from her life now, but its legacy remained. A daughter raised without financial fear, a future built on solid ground, and the unshakable knowledge that she had been seen, valued, and chosen by the man who mattered most. And that, Claire thought, as she drove home to where Emma was waiting with homework and stories about her day, was the real treasure. Not the money they'd found, but the love that had hidden it there, waiting patiently to be discovered by the only person who would truly understand its worth. 5 years had passed since Claire discovered her father's secret, and the world had continued turning, indifferent to the quiet revolution that had transformed her life. She stood now in the lobby of Tampa General Hospital, no longer wearing the faded scrubs of a nursing aide, but the crisp uniform of a registered nurse, her name badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Claire Bennett, RN, Pediatric, ICU. The journey to this moment had been long but steady. Night classes while Emma did homework, clinical rotations that tested every ounce of her strength, study sessions that stretched past midnight, fueled by coffee and the memory of her father's words. "You're the strongest person I know." She'd proven him right, graduating with honors, accepting a position in one of the most challenging departments in the hospital. But nursing was only part of the transformation. The foundation she'd established in her father's name, the Robert Bennett Family Support Fund, had quietly helped 43 single parents over the past 3 years. Rent assistance, utility bills, car repairs, medical expenses. The kind of emergencies that used to break Claire now barely touched the families she helped, because someone was there to catch them when they fell. She ran the foundation anonymously through Michelle's legal firm. The grants distributed without fanfare or recognition. Recipients received simple letters. A private donor who understands your struggle wants to help. No applications, no bureaucracy, just help appearing when people needed it most, the way her father's gift had appeared for her. Emma was 13 now, tall and confident, thriving in the private school. Claire had enrolled her in after much deliberation. The girl played violin in the youth orchestra, maintained straight A's, and had recently expressed interest in marine biology after a field trip to the aquarium. She'd never known poverty the way Claire had, never felt the gnawing anxiety of wondering if there would be enough. That innocence, that security, it was worth more than any amount of money. The family dynamics had shifted in subtle ways over those 5 years. Marcus had lost the house refinanced too many times, trying to flip properties during a market downturn, eventually foreclosing. He and his wife now rented a townhouse and rarely attended family gatherings, the shame of his financial failure keeping him away. Diane had divorced, her marriage crumbling under the stress of her husband's unemployment and their mounting debts. She'd moved back to Tampa, working in retail management, driving a sensible sedan instead of the luxury SUV. Kevin had somehow landed on his feet through sheer luck, marrying a woman with family money and now working in her father's construction business. He'd become insufferable about his success, posting constantly on social media about his blessed life and manifesting abundance, conveniently forgetting the years he'd spent asking relatives for loans. They still didn't know about Claire's inheritance. To them, she was still just Claire, the nurse who'd managed to get her RN license, who lived modestly, who'd done okay for herself, but nothing spectacular. They saw the surface, the normal house, the practical car, the daughter in a good school that they assumed she was sacrificing to afford. What they didn't see was the investment portfolio that had grown to over $4 million, the college fund that would send Emma to any university she wanted without loans, the retirement account that meant Claire would never work past 60 if she didn't want to, the quiet generosity that had changed dozens of lives through the foundation. But secrets have weight, and Claire was learning that carrying one this large, even a joyful one, created its own complications. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in October, during what should have been an ordinary family dinner at their Aunt Patricia's house. Patricia was their father's sister, a woman in her 70s, who'd always maintained neutrality in family disputes, hosting quarterly gatherings that everyone attended out of obligation and genuine affection for her. Claire arrived with Emma, carrying a dish she'd prepared, expecting the usual small talk and passive-aggressive comments. But the atmosphere felt different immediately. Marcus and Diane sat close together on the couch, unified in a way that triggered Claire's instincts. Kevin lounged in an armchair, his expression smug. "Claire," Aunt Patricia said gently, her eyes worried. "Come, sit down. Your siblings want to talk to you about something." Emma looked at her mother uncertainly. Claire squeezed her daughter's hand and said, "Go help Aunt Patricia in the kitchen, sweetheart." Once Emma was out of earshot, Marcus leaned forward, his face serious. "We've been doing some thinking, and we need to talk about Dad's estate." "The estate was settled 5 years ago," Claire said evenly. "That's just it," Diane interjected, her voice tight. "We don't think it was settled fairly. We've been talking to a lawyer." "You hired a lawyer?" Claire's heart rate increased, but her voice remained calm. "Just for consultation," Marcus said, "and he thinks we might have grounds to contest the will. Dad was elderly, possibly not of sound mind when he made those final changes." "He was completely sound," Claire said sharply. "You know that." "Do we?" Kevin's voice was ugly. "Because it doesn't make sense, Claire. None of it. You get a worthless container. We get actual assets. And yet somehow you're living better than any of us. New house, private school for Emma, that nice car. Where's the money coming from?" The room fell silent. Claire could feel their eyes on her, suspicious, jealous, calculating. This was the moment she'd always known would come but had hoped to avoid. "I work full-time as an RN," she said. "Pediatric ICU. It pays well." "Not that well," Diane said. "I looked it up. Average RN salary in Tampa is $65,000. You couldn't afford Emma's school on that. Not with a mortgage. I don't have a mortgage. Exactly. Marcus stood up, pacing. How? How do you own a house free and clear 5 years after Dad died, while the rest of us are struggling? What aren't you telling us? Claire took a breath, weighing her options. She could continue lying, could manufacture explanations, could protect the secret her father had entrusted to her, or she could end this, once and for all, with the truth. Dad left me money, she said quietly. The room erupted. What? How much? Where? There was no money. When the lawyer read the will, Claire raised her hand, silencing them. The will was accurate. You got what it said you got. But there was money Dad had kept separate, outside the estate. Money he earned and saved decades ago. He hid it, and he left me instructions on where to find it. How much? Marcus's voice was barely controlled. Enough. How much, Claire? She met his eyes steadily. Almost $3 million. In cash, hidden in that container you all laughed at. The silence that followed was absolute. Diane's face had gone white. Kevin looked like he'd been slapped. Marcus's jaw worked soundlessly. Then the shouting started. $3 million. That's illegal. Tax evasion. You have to split it. This is theft. We're calling the lawyer tomorrow. Claire stood, her voice cutting through the chaos. It wasn't part of the estate. It was never reported as assets. It was a private settlement from a workplace accident 30 years ago that he kept in cash. There's no legal requirement for me to share it. And I won't. You selfish, Kevin started. Selfish? Claire's voice was ice. I was the one who visited him every Sunday for 5 years, while you all were too busy. I was the one who sat with him through chemo, who helped him to the bathroom when he was too weak to walk, who held his hand when he was dying. Where were you? That doesn't mean he left you what he thought you could handle. A house you immediately refinanced into foreclosure, Marcus. Investments you spent in 3 years. Diane. $20,000 you blew in 6 months, Kevin. He knew exactly what you'd do with it. And he was right. So, he gave you millions? Diane's voice broke. While we got scraps? He gave you what you valued. Immediate, visible wealth. He gave me what I valued. Security. And he trusted me to use it wisely. Which I have. Emma's college is paid for. I've helped 43 families through a foundation in his name. I've built something that will last. A foundation? Marcus's laugh was bitter. You're giving away money that should be ours? It was never yours. It was Dad's. And he chose to give it to me. Aunt Patricia, who'd been silent through all of this, finally spoke. Claire, is this true? Robert left you that much? Claire turned to her aunt, the only person in the room whose opinion she cared about. Yes. He left me a letter explaining everything. He wanted me to have it because... Her voice softened. Because he said I was the one who never asked for anything. Patricia nodded, slowly, tears in her eyes. That sounds like my brother. Always seeing what others missed. This isn't over, Marcus said, grabbing his coat. We're contesting this. You'll hear from our lawyer. Do what you need to do, Claire said tiredly. But you'll find everything was legal. Dad was very careful about that. They left in a storm of slammed doors and angry voices. Only Patricia remained. And Emma, who emerged from the kitchen with wide, frightened eyes. Mom? Claire gathered her daughter close. It's okay, baby. It's all going to be okay. But she wasn't sure that was true. The next 3 months were brutal. Marcus, Diane, and Kevin pooled their resources and hired a lawyer to investigate the inheritance. They demanded documents, threatened lawsuits, and made Claire's life miserable with constant texts and calls demanding their share. Michelle, Claire's attorney, handled most of it with cool professionalism. They have no case, she assured Claire repeatedly. The money was never part of the probate estate. Your father kept it in cash for 30 years. There's no paper trail, no tax liability for you, and no legal obligation to share. They're just angry. But legal right and family peace were different things. The stress affected Claire's work, her sleep, her relationship with Emma. She'd thought the truth would set her free, but instead, it had opened a war. The worst came when Marcus posted on social media a long, carefully worded statement about family betrayal and hidden assets, and the importance of honesty. He didn't name Claire directly, but the implication was clear. Comments flooded in from cousins and distant relatives, all weighing in, most taking sides. Claire's phone buzzed with messages. Is it true? You should share with your siblings. Family is more important than money. Your father would be ashamed. That last one, from a second cousin she barely knew, nearly broke her. She sat at her kitchen table, phone in hand, and cried, for the first time since finding the vault. Not because she regretted keeping the money, but because the gift her father had given her, meant to bring peace and security, had instead brought division and pain. Emma found her there. The girl had turned into a remarkably perceptive teenager, and she wrapped her arms around her mother without saying a word. "I'm sorry you're going through this, Mom," she finally said. "I'm sorry you have to see it," Claire replied. "Are you going to give them money?" Claire looked at her daughter, saw the intelligence and concern in her eyes, and decided Emma deserved the truth. "No," she said, "because it wouldn't help them. They'd spend it and still be angry. Some people are never satisfied, Emma. They always think they deserve more than they have, and no amount will ever be enough." Grandpa understood that. That's why he gave them what he did, enough to help, but not enough to ruin them. "Did he give you too much?" Claire smiled sadly. "He gave me exactly right. Because he knew I wouldn't let it change who I am." "Has it changed you?" Claire thought about this carefully. "It's made me more secure, more peaceful. But I'm still the same person who worked double shifts and made you wear hand-me-downs. I just don't have to do those things anymore." Emma nodded, processing this. Then, "Good, because I like who you are." The legal battle fizzled out after 6 weeks, when their lawyer informed them they had no case. The money had never been part of the estate, and even if it had been, the will's language was ironclad. They could spend thousands pursuing it, or they could accept reality. They chose acceptance, but bitter acceptance. The family fractured. Gatherings stopped. Phone calls became rare and strained. Claire grieved the loss, but she also felt a strange relief. The performance was over. She no longer had to pretend to be less than she was, to hide her security, to downplay her success. 6 months after the revelation, Claire received an unexpected letter. It was from Diane, handwritten, arriving at her house in a plain envelope. "Claire, I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I owe you an apology. Not for being hurt I was hurt, but for how I handled it. The truth is, I'm jealous. I'm jealous that Dad saw something in you he didn't see in the rest of us. I'm jealous that you were patient enough to visit him, strong enough to care for him, wise enough to use what he gave you in ways we never could have. Marcus and Kevin won't admit this, but Dad was right about us. We did waste what he gave us. I spent my inheritance trying to impress people I didn't even like. Marcus tried to get rich quick instead of building slowly. Kevin is still Kevin. But you took what looked like garbage and found the treasure inside. That's who you've always been. And maybe that's why Dad loved you best, because you loved him for who he was, not what he could give you. I don't expect us to be close again. I don't think I've earned that. But I wanted you to know I understand now why he chose you. And if our positions were reversed, I probably wouldn't share either. Take care of yourself and Emma. You're a better person than any of us deserved as a sister. Diane." Claire read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't reconciliation exactly, but it was something almost better. Acknowledgement. Diane saw the truth now, and even if it hurt her to admit it, she'd been brave enough to say it. Claire wrote back a short note thanking her for the honesty and leaving the door open for future connection. She didn't know if Diane would walk through it, but the possibility existed now where it hadn't before. That spring, on what would have been her father's 88th birthday, Claire did something she'd been planning for months. She drove Emma out to the old shipyard where Robert Bennett had worked for 40 years. The place had been partially renovated, turned into a mixed-use development with apartments and shops, but one section remained a small maritime museum dedicated to the history of Tampa's working waterfront. Claire had been in contact with the museum director for weeks, and today they were unveiling something special: the Robert Bennett Memorial Scholarship Fund, a $500,000 endowment that would provide full scholarships to children of shipyard workers pursuing careers in skilled trades or nursing. The plaque was simple brass, mounted near the entrance. In memory of Robert Bennett, 1937 to 2019, welder, father, and believer in the dignity of work and the power of education. This scholarship fund helps children of working families build futures their parents dreamed of. Like Robert, it works quietly, asks for nothing, and changes lives. Emma stood beside her mother, reading the words aloud in a trembling voice. "Grandpa would have loved this." "I think he did love it," Claire said softly. "I think he planned for it. The money wasn't just for us, Em. It was for all of this, the security. Yes, but also the ability to help others the way we were helped." At the small dedication ceremony, attended by old shipyard workers who remembered Robert and a few local officials, Claire gave a brief speech. She didn't mention the $3 million, or the container, or the family drama. She simply talked about a man who worked hard, loved quietly, and understood that the best inheritance wasn't what you left behind, but what you taught people to do with what they'd been given. After the ceremony, an elderly man approached her. He had the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades working outdoors, and his handshake was firm despite his age. "I worked with your father for 20 years, he said. "Lost touch after I retired, but I heard about his passing. I'm sorry. Thank you. He was a good man, quiet, but good. Always helping guys who needed it, slipping them money when their kids were sick, covering shifts when someone was in trouble. He never made a big deal of it, just did it." Claire felt tears prick her eyes. "I didn't know that. Most people didn't. That was Robert did things because they needed doing, not for credit." The old man smiled. "He talked about you sometimes. His Claire Bear. Said you were just like him. I see now he was right." After he walked away, Claire stood looking at the plaque for a long time. She understood now, fully, what her father had done. The money hadn't been about wealth or even security. Not really. It had been about continuation, passing on not just resources, but values. The value of quiet generosity, of working without recognition, of seeing people's true worth beneath their surface struggles. He'd given her the means to live those values at scale, to help others the way he'd helped his co-workers, to build something that would outlast them both. That evening, back at home, Claire updated the foundation's records. The Bennett Family Support Fund had helped 78 families now. The scholarship fund would help hundreds more over the coming decades. And she was planning a third initiative, a small grant program for single parents, going back to school. Exactly the kind of help she'd needed, but never had. The money her father had left would eventually be spent, but the impact would ripple forward through generations. Children educated, families stabilized, dreams realized. That was the real inheritance, not the cash in those boxes, but the philosophy behind hiding it, protecting it, and trusting the right person to use it well. Emma came into the office, homework in hand. "Mom, can you help me with this essay? It's about what inheritance means." Claire smiled. "Perfect timing. I think I've finally figured that out myself." They worked together at the kitchen table, mother and daughter, surrounded by the security and peace that Robert Bennett had built for them. Outside, the Florida sun set in shades of orange and gold, painting the sky the color of possibility. And somewhere, Claire liked to think, her father was watching, satisfied that his gamble on the daughter everyone else had overlooked had paid off exactly as he'd known it would. The rusty container was long gone, sold, and repurposed, but its legacy lived on in scholarship checks and rent assistance and college funds, in a daughter who knew her worth and a granddaughter who would never doubt hers, in a family foundation that would help others long after Claire herself was gone. That was the real treasure, not what had been hidden in the ground, but what had been planted there. The seeds of generosity, patience, and the quiet understanding that some things are worth more than they appear, if you're willing to look beneath the rust. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.